Welcome to the Well Workplaces podcast, where we have authentic conversations with health and wellbeing leaders that are on a mission to inspire healthy change in the workplace. I'm your host, Tom Bosner, and today's episode is proudly brought to you by Pinnacle Health Group, Australia's leading corporate wellbeing provider. And I'm joined today by special guest, Poppy Griffiths. Poppy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. What a great introduction. Great to be here.
Now, a little bit about Poppy. Poppy, I'm just going to give you a bit of a summary or a bit of a bio here for the listeners. So Poppy Griffiths is a professional coach and speaker on high performance, and she's the director and founder of Unlimit You, which is a high performance consultancy. And Poppy is on today, and then we're kicking off a new mini series, which is all about women in leadership and supporting women to confidently own their career success and be courageous and authentic leaders for others. So, Poppy, I'm excited today to talk about the power of vulnerability to show up as our best selves, focusing specifically on women and courageous women leaders more specifically. So, Poppy, what about courageous leadership as from your perspective? Obviously, this is something that you talk about all the time in the workshops that you do and the speaking that you do. So what's courageous leadership all about?
Yeah, so I believe essentially we're all leaders, right? So no matter, I guess, our gender or, the title we hold at work or our job role or, even our chosen career path, really, be that paid or unpaid, I do believe that each of us are courageous leaders, and we really are capable agents of positive change, as I like to say, with where we each bring unique talents. We each bring very unique talents to the table. And I think beyond our traditional view of leadership hierarchy, every one of us uses our talents and these strengths to make these positive impacts and contributions. And that can be, to the families we live in, or the communities we choose to operate in, or in a professional sense, it's the organisations we work for. So, with that, I guess, as a bit of context, how do we define, or how can we define what a courageous leader is? I define it as anyone really who takes responsibility for finding potential in themselves, but also the potential in others, and really who has the courage, and this is where the courage piece comes into it, who has the courage to develop that potential in any situation, and most importantly, when they can't control or predict the outcome, because that's the real sign of, I guess, being a courageous leader, is that we do show up when we can't control or predict the outcome. And I think when we think of that definition specifically, we can understand or begin to unpack that courage can be hard, right? No, there is no doubt about it. And we all face situations in work and life where the stakes are really high, and the circumstances turn against us. And I think we all doubt our abilities often, and certainly our ability to be courageous. But this is being human, right? This is just human. And I always say to people, every time you doubt your ability, and that positive impact that you can have on your own life, but also that you can have on the lives of others, all we're doing is actually fueling and providing more power to those doubts. So when we are courageous in how we lead ourselves and influence others, this is actually how we build the deepest connections and relationships really with each other. And we can perform at our best individually and collectively. And I think most importantly, we're happier, right? We're happier people.
Yeah, great. And that's an awesome definition of courageous leadership. And I think for maybe some context as well, why do you think this is important from a woman's perspective?
Yeah, look, I think as women, we often, we can hold ourselves back from leaning into the things that we really want, or we can find ourselves doubting our abilities, doubting our abilities at home, doubting our abilities in a professional sense. We often do take on a lot, and we take on a lot of mental load. There's still a lot of stereotypes and gender biases that exist in our society. And I think women, I'm a real supporter of really inspiring and supporting more women to be able to lead into the authentic leaders that they are in any aspect, not in the traditional leadership hierarchy, but just in any aspect of their life, so that they can really show up confident and courageous, and know that they can make that positive impact to themselves, on their families, and in the work setting and professional career that they have. Yeah.
When you think about courageous leaders that are maybe in the public eye, are there any examples that you refer to often, or that you kind of go, oh, that's a really great leader that is sort of in the public eye? Is there anyone that comes to mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, especially in the realm of vulnerability, and a leader, and somebody that's spoken a lot on courage. You would have heard of Brene Brown, right? Who's a researcher and TED talker and author. And I think for me, because I identify a lot around what she talks about when it comes to courageous leadership and the importance of vulnerability. I think as a role model and as a leader that's really challenged organisations and challenged women and men to think about what courageous leadership is, and to be able to more readily stand up as courageous leaders confidently and authentically. I do really value the work that, I think Brene Brown's fantastic, and I really value the work that she has done around courageous leadership and vulnerability. So she definitely, I think, as a leader in this area. I know me, myself, as an individual, I've had the fortune of having some really fantastic bosses, managers, leaders, and mentors in my life, in my professional life. And I think upon reflection, what made them really fantastic leaders was actually their ability to be vulnerable, and to really lean into that, and to encourage those around them and the teams that they led to be able to be vulnerable as well, and to acknowledge what all of our needs and wants and desires are, and to be respectful and I guess in times challenge the status quo, not be fearful of what others think, and to be open and vulnerable. And those leaders definitely have had a significant impact professionally for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I think, yeah, most people can have a moment to reflect on those, really great bosses that they've worked for, or managers, or people that they've sort of modeled in work, or even in just normal life. But there's always something about those people, and a lot of the time you're right, it's kind of that them being prepared to be open, honest, and really authentic in how they communicate with what's going on. And I think that's what is most respected of those types of people in the end. Do you think there's any, I guess, are there any other aspects that are or what do you think is like a key success factor to being a courageous leader? Is there more to it than that, or is that about it?
Oh, look, no, there's definitely, as you said then, just the way, I guess, a leader chooses to show up and how they choose to lead their team. That definitely is all about being vulnerable in my eyes, and being able to lean in to being vulnerable. But I think as far as success goes, I think it's worth acknowledging how do you successfully be vulnerable, I guess, and be more courageous in how you lead. Is there are things that stop us from being vulnerable, and they're common behaviours, and I think cultural issues that all leaders identify as getting in the way. As individuals, as humans, we often, I think, avoid tough conversations, and we're fearful to hear feedback and often to give it. And I think certainly now more than ever with tech, the way technology is advancing, we often aren't as connected as well as we once were in all senses. So this definitely can impact the empathy, and I think the trust that we can build with others as well. And I think the other thing is we tend to often get caught up in defining ourselves and get stuck by setback or failure. And that really prevents us from being able to vulnerably lead in and make courageous decisions and lead teams courageously, because we're quite fearful, I guess, of what others may think, or if we fail, or if we're ridiculed. And I think there is a bit of an obsession often with perfectionism. And that it's destructive to our self-worth, and really, I think, to the high performance and teamwork. And I think the great leaders that are really, I think, willing to lean into vulnerability and courageous leadership, they do a really great job at being able to break down, I guess, some of these cultural issues that do get in our way.
Yeah, I really resonate with the avoiding those uncomfortable conversations comment that you made. I think I kind of reflected going into this chat. I was reflecting on my own kind of journey as a leader in my business, but also, in my home life as well. And I was kind of thinking about has there been any moments where I've been really vulnerable, or has there been moments where I've avoided doing it because of whatever got in my way of doing it, of whatever that mental block was or whatever it was. But and I had one example which was, it was early in the business running of my business, Pinnacle Health Group, and I had some staff, I guess, uncomfortable type conversations, and I didn't really know how to address it. And I actually avoided a lot of conflict, I guess, because I wanted to be liked in the end, because, we were new, and it was, running a business is meant to be always fun and exciting, and nothing ever goes wrong. And so, to be honest, I reckon for the first four years, I wasn't really prepared to have an uncomfortable conversation with staff and external things. And then we had some we've had some moments in that journey where I've had to really as you say, be vulnerable and share what I'm really feeling. And so there was a time where we had a leaders retreat, and we're away in Torquay, and I was really open and honest with our team about what I'd been through to get to that point. And I actually cried in front of about 10 of our managers. And because it was I got overcome with emotion for whatever reason with what I was talking about. And what I realized when that happened was it was the first time that I'd really opened up and been completely honest with the whole effort and journey that comes with running a business, I guess. And it really, what I got out of doing that was, I think, from the people that were there, it meant a lot to them, because it was the first time that they'd seen me express myself in that really raw way. And I guess vulnerability isn't about being emotional all the time. It's probably more than anything, it's just being honest, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you raise a great point around the honesty and the realness. I mean, just hearing that story then, Tom, you're obviously, yes, it may have been emotional, but you were being honest and real, and you were laying, the cards on the table as they were for everybody to see. And I think in those situations, as a leader, and as certainly the leader of your business, you're building the greatest trust, and you're building really great human connections and trustworthy relationships where people feel that they can really, they identify, they trust that you're telling them an open and honest story. And if there's emotion in that, well, that's because we're human as well. But I think the success factor about vulnerability and being courageous enough to lean into it is that when we do it, we build great relationships, we build great trust, and we know off the back of that, performance follows as well. And our ability to trust and lean in and perform well together is only accelerated. So I think, that's a really great example that you've given. And it's probably highlighting, what I mentioned before about this obsession that we can have for sort of perfectionism and looking like we're failing or not knowing what we're doing. We need to ditch that. And in a work setting sense, I often say, people ask me, how can you be more courageous? Well, ditching this obsession we have for perfectionism and fear of failure is like, that is the best way to start, because we get caught up in these behaviors because we actually think we're striving for excellence, right, and achievement. But when we're sort of locked down and fearful of, I guess, our own self-worth and not being honest with others and saying it as it is, that's just us in our defensive mode, like fearing that we can't make a mistake or that we're going to be criticized for not being good enough or not working hard enough. And I often say, try and think about focusing on what I call healthy striving. So, is that like, is 90% good enough? And in your instance, like, you may not have had the solution to some of the challenges that you were facing at that time, but sometimes being honest and saying it as it is better than, masking the situation. So I think ditching perfectionism actually starts with being more empathetic and, even showing the emotion that you probably did in that situation. You were actually building empathy with the team that you had. And I think that not only helps you, but it probably helps others also build their own self-compassion and empathy towards themselves, which we know is so important for each of our own self-worth. So, when we can be more vulnerable ourselves, and it starts with ourselves, we're actually giving permission to others to be more vulnerable and to know that they have, that they can be compassionate towards themselves and believe that they've got great self-worth.
Yeah, exactly. I think, well, the main lesson for me out of that whole thing was it felt like a sense of relief in doing it. And then from that point, realizing the connections, the actual, I guess, the relationships built, not just from me, that one thing, but what followed on from that for our business. Just the relationships got better and it felt more, I was continually open. And I guess from there, it was quite a pivotal moment in my head anyway for me, because it was before that I was probably wearing the perfection mask to work and trying to be, perfect in the style of leadership that I was trying to run with at the time. What stops people from being vulnerable, do you think? Is it more just around trying to be perfect, or are they, what is that?
I think, a couple of things. There are definitely common behaviours and cultural issues that are really ingrained in us as humans. I mentioned a couple of them earlier, just around, that fear of having a tough conversation and needing to give feedback or have feedback. I think definitely the fact where we're not connected, where we don't have as strong human connections with one another, that actually really reduces our ability and acknowledgement, I think, to be empathetic and to build that trust with others. So, in your instance, being on a retreat with others, like, you can't be more connected, right, to your team than that. And certainly in the last couple of years, we all haven't had as much opportunity for those instances. So, and the perfectionism, that definitely stops people from being vulnerable. I think there is probably a few myths around as well when it comes to vulnerability. Like, I think a lot of people would say they grew up or they still believe that it feels like a weakness. And for others, and sometimes too, for men more than women, it's almost like this feeling of we just don't do vulnerability, right? Like, we just don't do it. It's not us. But if you actually consider vulnerability, and Brené Brown talks about this, that it's really, vulnerability is basically the emotion, right, that we experience during times of uncertainty or risk, or when we feel emotionally exposed. Think about how many of us every day, in our every given day, have to take calculated risks or have to make hard decisions that we wish that we didn't have to, or have to have tough conversations with colleagues or our kids, or we are often in situations where we really do feel emotionally exposed. So to say that it's a weakness is in some ways, it's miscorrect. It's really not correct, because vulnerability surrounds all of us every day. And it's not a weakness. And when we choose to ignore it, we're actually really ignoring our own values and our ability to live life with true integrity. So yeah, I think, I also bring back up that trust, and we've touched on this, we also need to trust one another to be vulnerable. And I think sometimes people think that, they can only be vulnerable if they have, 100% trust from somebody and they know them really well. But to be honest, trust is a two-way street, right? With everybody in our lives. We have to show trust behaviors to be trusted, and others have to do the same for us. And a lot of the times trust isn't actually really earned in the big moments of life. It's often through simple things like, taking the time to remember something about somebody at work, or your boss remembering the small details in, your family's life. A lot of the time, yeah, it comes back down to realizing that trust, I think, is the hallmark of being vulnerable. But we have to trust one another in order to be vulnerable, and we really need to lean into that, and not wait for somebody else to trust us, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's a big standoff if it's waiting for that, either that perfect moment or that perfect level of equal trust. Because you're right, it's those small moments of giving, perhaps, as a way of facilitating trust. Those examples you gave with work were really spot on there.
Yeah.
What sort of practical things can people do to embrace their vulnerability, to be a bit more courageous as leaders?
Yeah, and look, that's the $1,000,000 question. We've touched on perfectionism.
Mm,
Uh, Definitely about, just thinking about almost like red flagging with yourself or in a team. Like, when does perfectionism tend to rear its head? Like, what are the signs that or as an individual, what do I know that I do or get caught in that perfectionism is like coming, and
mm,
and how can I stop? How can I stop myself? As a team, sometimes it takes us actually thinking about what our roles and responsibilities are, what each of our strengths are, and really leaning into them. And as I say, swimming in your own lane, right? Being confident of your self-worth and your abilities, your role, your strengths, and not necessarily trying to be everything to everyone, but acknowledging that we all come to the table with different strengths. And I think that probably leads into, definitely, one thing I'd say beyond perfectionism is we need to stop hustling for our worth, right? And I mentioned the importance of self-worth before. If we don't know what we're good at and what our strengths are, we do tend to just jump in crazily to everything, sort of trying to add value, certainly in a team setting when we're working together. And that often is not really that helpful. We're trying to be right rather than get it right.
mm,
If we don't know our own value, and what our strengths are, that really stops us from being able to, I guess, just be comfortable with what our self-worth is, and embracing the things that we are good at, and allowing each of us to find our flow, and build more trusting relationships and perform, I think, better overall individually, but as a team as well.
mm.
So definitely, that is stopping, as I say, hustling for our worth, and knowing really where your self-worth and strengths are. And the last thing I'd say is, and I think this is about, we need to really remove a culture of where we celebrate fitting in. Like, it's not about fitting in. We actually need to really start to think about building diverse perspectives and a greater sense of belonging and inclusion, where we really celebrate the differences. And I think somebody that is willing to be vulnerable, and somebody that's willing to be courageous, they will champion, yes, they'll champion the individual, but they'll also champion the collective. And they'll allow their team and individuals to really show up as their authentic selves every day, where they'll find opportunities for individuals to be able to bring diverse perspectives to the table, and to bring their individual strengths. I think that is really, really important, that we find these practical ways to move away from a fitting in culture, but instead create a culture where there is difference, but inclusion, and a sense of belonging with our differences.
Mm. Oh, I like that one. Yeah, that's awesome. I think everyone can probably relate to being in a really great team, but it's not 10 people that all look the same and have the same interests. It's kind of that team where everyone's a little bit different. There's still a great energy there, and if there's the leader of that team, perhaps, who can kind of pick out the strengths of everyone and kind of enhance them by being open and honest themselves in the way that they communicate. It's a really nice feeling to be in that environment. I've been in some great teams and obviously in some losing teams along the way. And yeah, just the feeling is really unique when you get it right.
Yeah, and I think the feeling, Tom, as you say, the feeling actually allows us to be more vulnerable, right? The reason why that is courageous leadership at its finest is because we have a culture that we can just be vulnerable and we can be ourselves and we can be open and we can build great empathetic, trusting relationships where everybody has self-worth and everybody's in a position where they can be authentically themselves and, bring their strengths to the table and thrive and perform well together.
Mm. Yeah, Poppy, amazing. I really love that chat today. I think looking forward to the next few discussions around this really important topic. And thanks so much for your time today.
Pleasure, Tom. Always great chatting with you. Thanks.
Take care.